Such is the price for speaking up in Russia today. That's what Vladimir Kara Murza, one of President Putin's most prominent critics, said in his closing remarks at his trial. Today, he waited in a bulletproof cage to hear that statement come true. His punishment, the maximum of 25 years, for criticising Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, an act Russia calls treason. A sign the Kremlin is further stepping up its relentless crackdown on dissent. Kara Murza, who has both British and Russian citizenship, had lobbied Western governments throughout the war, helping impose harsh sanctions on individuals accused of violating human rights as part of the Magnitsky Act. Individuals, including a judge who then later presided over this trial. Watching on in an adjoining room was the British ambassador.
The verdict came after a hasty closed trial. A criminal case was initiated against him for his bold speech against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The British government expresses its solidarity with Vladimir Kara Murza and his family and calls for his immediate release.
The Cambridge University-educated critic had originally been arrested for disobeying a police officer over a year ago. It wasn't until later, when he was in custody, when more serious crimes were levelled against him. But even those were completely fabricated, according to his wife. The real crime, as far as Russia is concerned, dissent on an international stage. This speech to US representatives in Arizona has been singled out as the act that landed him the toughest sentence seen for a political opponent since the start of the war.
And very quickly, Vladimir Putin began to go after independent media, began to go after opposition parties, began to rig elections, imprison opponents, then murder opponents, and very quickly, within the space of literally a few years, transformed Russia from an imperfect democracy that we had back in the 1990s to the perfect authoritarian state that he has built today.
Sanctions had already been imposed on one Russian official as well as the judge, but today the British government said they could go further.
And I have instructed officials to investigate the possibility of sanctioning everyone who was involved in this trial, and we expect within the next week to come forward with a package of further measures in this respect.
But Kara Murza had always been prepared for the ramifications of speaking out. He nearly died twice after being poisoned, and some support today from a friend who suffered a similar fate. The jailed Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, despite new concerns over his declining health, his anti-corruption foundation raising the possibility he has been poisoned again.
I believe that Vladimir Kara Murza is being persecuted for political reasons. I regard the sentence as illegal, shameless, and simply fascist.
Well, this is effectively internal terror. By doing this to Vladimir Kara Murza, who spoke out against the war and spoke out against Putin, the message was that if you do this now, the same thing could happen to you. And so if you're somebody who is not happy with the war, and there are many people in Russia that are not happy with the war, if you're somebody who's not happy with Putin, you basically have to risk your life. You have to be ready to give up your life to express your opinion. And many people, most people, are not that brave.
Reading Solzhenitsyn, Russia's most famous Soviet dissident, Kara Murza knows Russia is a country of symbols. His sentence now a signal to others of what happens when you speak out in Russia.
Well, I spoke to Mr. Kara Murza's wife, Evgenia, before we came on air, and I began by asking for her immediate reaction to her husband's sentencing.
Well, I am, and always was, always will be proud of my husband. And I believe that this absolutely atrocious sentence is actually the high recognition of the effectiveness of my husband's work. This is an A+ for his consistent, courageous work on behalf of Russian civil society, on behalf of our country. This is the recognition of the effectiveness of the of those instruments that Vladimir has been fighting for. Specifically the Magnitsky sanctions that are now allow the free democratic world to go after human rights abusers.
Incredible to hear of your pride in your husband. I wonder, though, given the judge saying that he's going to be held in a correctional colony, a very strict regime, what are your fears for how he will be treated?
My fears, I am very much concerned about my husband's health and about my husband's life, and not just because he might be treated badly, but because his health has significantly deteriorated over the past year. My husband survived 2 assassination attacks in the past, in 2015 and 2017. These attacks left him with peripheral nerve damage. He had polyneuropathy symptoms after the poisonings, and he was able to restore his health and to keep these symptoms at bay through regular physical exercise by staying very active. Now, after a year in pretrial detention and some time that he spent in solitary confinement, these symptoms not only returned, but they seem to be spread into his right side as well. So now he's losing feeling in both his feet and his left hand. And I realized that this is a very serious diagnosis.
When was the last time you had contact with your husband?
The kids and I last seen, well, we haven't seen or spoken to him since last April. Vladimir had been fighting. Vladimir had been fighting for many months to have the right to have phone conversations with his children. In December of last year, he received his first official refusal. I am sure that it was meant as a nice Christmas present. The official paper said that phone conversations with his kids would impede the due legal process in the criminal case against him. Now, a couple of days ago, Vladimir received a second refusal of that right. And this time, it was said that phone conversations with his kids were prohibited because his kids were living in the US and some secret information might somehow leak out. I don't know what they mean by this, but I understand that this is just pure psychological pressure that they're putting on Vladimir. This is psychological torture for someone who loves his family deeply, to be isolated from his family, to not be able to even see or speak to his children for over a year. I understand why they're doing this, for the same reason they're doing everything else in his case, to break him. But they will not succeed.
Do you feel anger that Western governments didn't listen to the warnings of your husband and many others?
This is obviously tragic and disappointing. And Vladimir, what we're seeing today is obviously an effort, the result of a collective effort, let's say. It is not, yes, the Russian people did not protest enough. We should have been more forceful and more demanding, maybe. But very often, the Russian population received very wrong signals from Western democratic countries. For example, like after the 2012 peaceful protests in Russia, where people were beaten into pulp in the streets of Moscow and then thrown in jail for many years under the Bolotnaya case, the West expressed concern and signed the deal for the construction of Nord Stream, which sent a very clear signal to Vladimir Putin that he could continue doing the same things. This is the only way. And in order for this to happen, the vertical of power that Vladimir Putin built in our country has to collapse.
And just finally, what must be an incredibly difficult time for you. What will be keeping you going and keeping your husband in your thoughts?
Vladimir will keep me going. The kids, our 3 kids, will keep me going. Understanding that my husband is fighting for the right cause will keep me going. Understanding that I'm sharing my life with someone who refuses to back down despite all odds, who refuses to be broken. And I need to be there for him, of course, and I want to be there for him. And I'm incredibly proud of him, and I admire him deeply. And I am so happy that our kids have this amazing father as an example to follow, and I will keep fighting for as long as it takes me.
Vladimir Kara Murza, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight.
Thank you very much.